shouldn't have done. Now, you notice it says he in the title, not something Bruno shouldn't have done, because this is, I suppose, a fairly ambiguous title, because it could fit all sorts of different people. But in this particular chapter, this is a big mistake from Bruno. This is probably the worst thing that he does throughout the whole text. But it shows how much he grows and how different he becomes after this as a character. All right, let's jump into it. So for several weeks, the rain was on and off. So his relationship with Shmuel is also affected by that. So his relationship is on and off as well. It's not just the rain that we're sort of talking about there. And when they did meet, Bruno found that he was starting to worry about his friend, because he seemed to be getting even thinner by the day, and his face was growing more and more grey. Now, have we seen this before? A character get thinner and greyer? With Pavel, good. So we know that this is a sign that he's, I suppose, coming to an end. Okay, his health is deteriorating, and he's obviously in trouble in terms of his life expectancy. And he brings some cheese and stuff, and he keeps eating the cake because he gets hungry on the way, which just shows how greedy and selfish he still is. Like, he can see that Shmuel is fading away, but he still gets so peckish on this hour journey that he has to eat the cake that he's got. Not that cake is going to save Shmuel, really, but, you know, eating anything is going to be better than having very little. And there's this talk of Father's birthday coming up soon, and, you know, the party that will ensue with that and all that sort of thing. And they talk about grown-ups and what they expect and experience from different grown-ups at different times. And we get, as we progress through, he still has this real fear of Kotler, and it's because of the way he treated Pavel mostly. And it says here, Bruno still hadn't forgotten the evening with Pavel, the waiter who was really a doctor, and how angry the lieutenant had been. So he's always shaky, he's always a bit cautious around Kotler. He doesn't trust him, and nor should he really. And on the afternoon before the birthday party, Bruno was in his room with the door open when he heard Lieutenant Kotler arriving at the house and speaking to someone, although he couldn't hear anyone answering back. A few minutes later, as he was coming downstairs, he heard Mother giving instructions about what needed to be done, and Lieutenant Kotler saying, "Don't worry, this one knows which side his bread is buttered on," and then laughing in a nasty way. Now, this is a really odd part of the text. And for me, this is a good indication that the mother and Kotler are having an affair. Because you don't use that sort of language, you don't use those sorts of lines, "I know which side my bread is buttered on," if there's not sort of some sexual, really, connection between the two characters. And it comes up later on when Kotler's, I suppose, transferred. The mother gets really upset about that. So we see that a little bit later on. And this is all occurring while the father is away. So it's kind of that line, while the cat's away, the mice will play sort of thing. And he just seems a little bit too comfortable in this household. And Bruno, he sort of captures it for us, but doesn't understand really what's going on. And of course, he starts to talk to Bruno about what he's doing and the books and that sort of stuff, about Treasure Island. And Kotler's never read Treasure Island, which is a good reference again to the whole book burning thing, where the Nazis didn't appreciate stories. They had to read things that were promotions of Nazi way of life and that sort of thing. So they didn't read novels for pleasure and that sort of stuff. And it keeps going through, and there's lots of this, I suppose, animosity. There's a bit of conflict between Bruno and Kotler. He really doesn't like him, and he tries to get away. And Bruno's starting to get a little bit more snappy, a little bit more brave with Kotler, because he feels, I suppose, that more and more threatened. Okay. And we see Bruno picking up sort of more language skills here. He's been listening to the way his sister speaks and uses a lot of sarcasm. And he tries to use sarcasm when he's talking to Kotler, which shows that he understands more about how to engage with people, and it understands more about the purpose and intention of language, which is really important. So if you're talking about characterization, and you want to talk about character development and growth throughout a text, these sorts of things are the little hints that Bruno's actually growing and changing quite significantly throughout this text. But he still calls him little man, and Bruno still hates that. And descriptions like this: a ball of anger exploded inside him and made him wish that he had the courage to say exactly what he wanted to say. Okay, this is important, that we see how he is almost powerless to talk over Kotler, which becomes important at the end of the chapter. All right, we'll move on. This line here, "Oh Kurt, precious, you're still here." Why would the mother be calling him by his first name Kurt and precious, unless there was something untoward going on between the two? So that's another piece of evidence, really, that they're having an affair. And then later on, seething with anger, Bruno went to the kitchen and got the biggest surprise of his life. There, sitting at the table a long way from the other side of the fence, was Shmuel. Bruno could barely believe his eyes. "Shmuel," he said, "what are you doing here?" So now we've got this crossover of the two different worlds. Usually, the two worlds are very distinct and separate because of the fence. But now that Shmuel has sort of been brought into Bruno's home, we've got this mixing of the worlds. And this is what causes a bit of conflict, because the way to act in one of them is different to the way to act in the other one, and we see what sort of problem that causes here. Okay, so we have this crossing over of the two worlds. Now Shmuel is scared out of his wits. He's been told to come in here, and his job is to clean these glasses. He has to polish the glasses, and that's all he needs to do. And he was selected because he's a child and he's got small fingers, and he can do a better job at polishing the glasses. Okay? And not only that, he's easier to control than an adult as well, because he's smaller and weaker. Throughout this conversation, there are some stark differences developed between the two characters. And the first one is their hands. If they look at each other's hands, the two boys look down at the same time to see the difference was easy to see. Although Bruno was small for his age and certainly not fat, his hands appeared healthy and full of life. The veins weren't visible through the skin. The fingers weren't little more than dying twigs. Shmuel's hand, however, told a different story. And this is a really good indication of how our physical appearance can actually tell a lot about our experiences, our history, our personality, and all those sorts of things. And they tell our story, where we've been. And those experiences really are what make us who we are as well. All right, the story continues. And Bruno just continues the conversation quite normally. And while he's doing that, goes off and grabs some food, cuts off some really nice juicy pieces of chicken and stuffing it in his mouth and enjoying this while he's talking. And then he notices that all Shmuel can do is look at this food. He's not really interested in the conversation, he's just looking at the food. And Bruno offers him some. And the reaction we get from Shmuel is really important here. He wants to do the right thing. In fact, he is very steadfast in making sure he doesn't do anything wrong. "I can't," said Shmuel, shaking his head and looking as if he was going to cry. "He'll come back, I know he will," he continued, his sentences running quickly together. "I should have eaten them when you offered them, and now it's too late. If I take them, he'll come in and of course, we know that Shmuel ends up taking some and gobbles them down within about 20 seconds. Okay? Which shows how, desperate he is for this food. All right? And it's something as simple as food there. And obviously Bruno takes all of that for granted. Then Kotler comes back in, and in some sort of miracle, he wants to know why these two kids are talking to each other, because there should be no engagement between the two at all. And then he asks the question directly of Shmuel, "Have you been eating?" So he's able to wise up to what's going on. These kids can't hide anything. Okay, this guy's an adult, he's tried all these sorts of things before. Okay, and we can see him asserting his control in these other lines that I've highlighted here as well. Who told you that you're allowed to talk in this house? Continued Kotler. Do you dare disobey me? No, sir, said Shmuel quietly. I'm sorry, sir. So we can see the huge power differential between these characters. And then he asks him about the eating. And then the question gets more specific, which makes it harder and harder for him to answer. Because he says, did you steal something from that fridge? And the answer to that's no. He didn't steal anything from the fridge at all. When he asks him, have you been eating? You'd have to answer yes. So we've got, the significance of the word choice is quite significant here. And then he responds when he answers that question. When he asks that question, did you steal something? He says, no, sir, he gave it to me. So he's answering both effectively. Tears welling up in his eyes, and he threw a sideways glance at Bruno. He's my friend, he added, as if to justify why he's got this. Began Lieutenant Coulter, looking across at Bruno in confusion. He hesitated. What do you mean he's your friend, he asked. Do you know this boy, Bruno? A simple question. And Bruno freaks out. And he prods and he probes, trying to get him to answer this question. And for some reason, probably just out of fear, Bruno responds, I've never spoken to him, said Bruno immediately. I've never seen him before in my life. I don't know him. So he's turned his back on his only friend. He's just completely denied the friendship that they shared. And we can see the result of this. Very slowly, he turned his head back to look at Shmuel, who wasn't crying anymore, merely staring at the floor and looking as if he was trying to convince his soul not to live inside his tiny body anymore, but to slip and sail to the door and rise up into the sky, gliding through the clouds until it was very far away. And if you think about that description, it's describing death. It's describing him sort of finishing the physical world and ascending into heaven. Okay, he would rather be dead than deal with the consequences. And we know, now that that's been discovered, what the outcome is going to be. Okay, because Kotler did the same thing to Pavel. Something goes wrong, he stuffs up, he beats him. And that's exactly what happens to Bruno. Sorry, not to Bruno, to Shmuel. All right. Later in the text, Bruno knows he's done something wrong, and that's really important. Because if he had done that to Shmuel and not recognised it as being wrong, he would have just been like all the other Nazis. But he's not. He recognises his mistake. He's got a little bit more humanity in him. And the quote here says, he had never felt so ashamed in his life. He had never imagined that he could behave so cruelly. He wondered how a boy who thought that he was a good person really could act in such a cowardly way towards a friend. That is a great line, okay, showing how important this relationship now is to him and how emotionally he reacts to this particular event that he's caused, effectively. And he keeps going back to the place in the fence, but Shmuel's not there for about a week or so, I think. And finally, one day, Shmuel is there. And of course, he begins with the apologies. I'm sorry, Shmuel. I don't know why I didn't tell the truth. Say you'll forgive me. It's all right, said Shmuel, looking up at him now. There was a lot of bruising on his face, and Bruno grimaced, and for a moment he forgot about his apology. What happened to you, he asked, and then didn't wait for an answer. Was it your bicycle? Because that happened to me back in Berlin a couple of years ago. I fell off when I was going too fast, and I was black and blue for weeks. Does it hurt? So Bruno doesn't get that he's caused him to get beaten up. He feels sorry and he feels guilty for not doing the right thing, but he doesn't understand that there were physical consequences to what he said. He still doesn't get that, doesn't work it out. And Shmuel doesn't say it. He doesn't sort of try and make Bruno feel guilty for it, which also shows that Shmuel is a good friend here, I suppose. He's a good person. He doesn't blame Bruno for doing what he did, because he probably thinks Bruno was just trying to protect himself as well. So it was a no-win situation, really, for both the boys. All right. And this line is a really sad one. I don't feel it anymore, said Shmuel. It looks like it hurts. I don't feel anything anymore, said Shmuel. As if he's dead. So it links into that quote that he said before where he wants his spirit to just disappear. It's as if he is now physically dead. And of course, Bruno wants to reiterate his apology. "I'm very sorry, Shmuel," he said in a clear voice. "I can't believe I didn't tell him the truth. I've never let a friend down like that before, Shmuel. I'm ashamed of myself." So it's really good to see people being honest in regards to their emotional state here, because there's a lot of false emotion going on. There's a lot of hiding of different things. There's a lot of shame that's being hidden and that sort of stuff. So it's good that we have a character, and it's significant that it's a young boy who's actually showing who they are. And then, of course, there's this really touching moment where they shake hands under the fence. And this is the first time they've ever touched. And this is a really important symbol of the bringing together of these two boys. So in the face of their difficulties and their problems, they still trust each other, and they still want to share this friendship.